Gute Woche. Can you hear you? I can hear you. Okay, Baruch Hashem. All right, here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning PESACHIM Daf Samaches. We are in middle of learning the Machloikes, Tanoi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Shimon, as to what's the source that a Metzoida is banished from all of the three camps. He's banished even from Achne Yisrael. As we learned, Rabbi Yehuda learns it from the Pasuk Badad Yeshev, and Rab Shimon learns it from the Pasuk Vishalchum and Amachne. And we also learned Shitas Rab Shimon that a Balkeri is also banned, not only or banished, not only from Machne Shechina, but like Azov, also from Machne Levia. We're going to learn in Daf Samaches Amadal of some Gavaldike Agadate, how Asidim Tzadikim Sheyichyu Asamesim. We're going to learn how La'asad Lavid is going to be what we call Chayim Nitzchiyim, eternal life, Begashmius Ba'olam Hazeh. We're going to have some beautiful Agadate regarding the imminent coming of Mashiach versus what's going to happen later at the phase or at the stage known as Olam Haba. It's only fitting that the Hashgacha Pratis Taka, we're standing Motzei Shabbos, Yud Shvat, Tavshin Pei Aleph, that we are learning about all of these Gavaldika topics, Mashiach related. And on Daf Samach Ches Amid Beis, we're going to go back to the Mishnah on Daf Samach Hey Amid Beis in the beginning of the Perek, and we're going to start to expound the Machloikes that we have there, beginning with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, and then Rabbi Akiva got involved. But that we're going to leave for Daf Samach Tes. Right, the issue was regarding what we will call machshirei, preliminaries to do the mitzvah of Pesach. So, for example, harkavasai, hava'asai michutz letchum, chatichas yabaltai, all activities that are prohibited only midrabanan, but they're prohibited midrabanan. Rabbi Yeshua says that they are prohibited to be done, even though without doing it, you won't be able to bring the Korban Pesach, and the Korban Pesach itself, when the 14th falls out on Shabbos, is Doiche Shabbos. But these preliminaries, since they should have been done and they could have been done prior to Shabbos, they are not Doiche Shabbos, versus the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer that holds that yes, that Doichen Shabbos, and that's going to be connected to another amazing Machloikes, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, regarding whether one could fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Yantiv by only learning, or is there an obligation regarding Yantiv of experiencing the Simcha, not only Beruchnius, but also Begashmius? And again, connected to Yud Shvat, the whole idea of the Doir Hashvi, of bringing the Shechina Dafka Betachtoinim. So there's obviously that we experience Simcha, Beruchnius. The question is that enough? Bringing it down, what we have to bring the Shechina Lamata, so we also have to experience Simcha, Begashmius as well, and a lot more. Chavra, let's start. We left off on Daf Samaches Amud Aleph, right? 6 lines from the top of the Amud. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol nivei dvarim. All right. So Nachamal, as we quoted the Tanach Rab Shimon, who also equates the Balkeri with the Zav, like a Zav, a Balkeri is banished also from Machne Levia. And the Gemara is going to challenge that shita. So Meisvei, it says in a Braisa, Metzoida is Chamur Mizav, which fits with everything that we have been learning, right? The Zav is banished from 2 Machnes, and the Metzoida is banished from 3 Machnes. And the Braisa continues, Vizav is Chamur, we're not stringent with him as much as the Metzoida, but we are more stringent with the Zav as to a Tamei Meis, which weiter fits, right? Tamei Meis only is banished from Machne Shechina. A Zav may also not be in Machne Levia. Now listen to these words. Yatsa Balkeri. Wow. Shetamei Meis Chamer Mimenu. Literally, that means exclude from this the Balkeri, that a Tamei Meis is even more Chamur than the Balkeri. Now we'll have to understand what that means. Because don't forget that a Tamei Meis is at least banished from Machne Shechina. If these words are to be taken literally, so what are we saying? That a Balkeri is allowed to be in the Machne Shechina? No. So the asks the Gemara, L'choira, my Yatza exclude. What do we mean to say? That Lav Yatza Michlal Zav can mean that the Balkeri is excluded from the Tamei Meis. There's nothing more lenient than that. Fakir, the Braisa L'choira is saying that a Balkeri is not in the category of Zav. Uba L'chlal Tamei Meis. He he is like a Tmei Meis. A Balkeri may not go into the Beis HaMikdash. He has to be banished from the Machna Shechina. But doesn't have to be banished from Machna Leviyah. Now, if that is the meaning of the Braisa, so when the Braisa concludes with the words, Shetmei Meis Chamur Mimenu, what does that mean? So explains the Gemara, this is all the Kasha, that the Ha Tmei Meis Chamur Mimenu, and Tmei Meis is more Chamur than a Zav. Tmei Meis is more Chamur than a Balkeri, because a Tmei Meis has to wait 7 days to become pure. A Balkeri just has to go to the mikvah, and yet, umuter b'machna leviyah. Oh, Tmei Meis is more Chamur, and he's muter b'machna leviyah. So for sure, that's the meaning of the Braisa, that a Balkeri should also be muter b'machna leviyah. That goes explicitly against the Tana Rab Shimon. Answers the Gemara, Loi. Read the Braisa different, that Yotza mi machne Tmei Meis, punkt verkehrt, that the Balkeri, right, is not included in the category of a Tmei Meis, and yes, the nichnas lemachne Zav, he is equated to a Zav, and the final words in the Braisa, the Ha Tmei Meis Chomer Mimenu, means Va'af al Gab the Tmei Meis Chomer Mimenu, which is true. Muter b'machna leviyah, and taka the Tmei Meis can be in the machna leviyah. Nevertheless, the Balkeri won't be in the category of a Tmei Meis. Why? Explains the Gemara, because l'mayda dami le'midaminale. You have to admit that a Balkeri is taka similar. Begashmi is to a Zav. Correct. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's very similar. That there's some sort of seminal emission. Tmei Meis is a whole different type of way of becoming Tamei. So therefore, fakert, the pshat of the Braisa is that we put Balkeri in the category of the Zav, acknowledging that Tmei Meis is really a lot more Chamur than the Balkeri. Nevertheless, when it comes to the din of being banished, mimachnois, he is like a Zav. Okay. Now, we're going to learn now, aside of the Tana Reb Shimon, that used the extra vav in the pasuk that we quoted from Nasi to include the Balkeri in the category of a zav. Now we're going to learn another Tana that has another source that will teach us that a Balkeri is like a zav banished from two machnes. Tana kamed Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Right, so someone who knew all of the Braisas by heart was chazering the following Braisa. The Braisa was based on a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitzei. Now, let me just read the entire pasuk. The pasuk reads that Kiyah b'cha ish asher lo yiyeh tahor mikra laila. That's a Balkeri. And the pasuk says v'yotza el michutz lamachane lo yavai el toich machane. He has to be banished from the machna, and he can't enter the machna. So let's read it inside. From which machna is he banished? Zumachna Shechina. When it says weiter, he should not enter the machna, it means he's not even allowed to enter machna leviyah. Zumachna leviyah. So says the Tana Mikan Labalkeri that sheyotza chutz l'shtei machnois. Now there's a problem. The problem is Amalei, this is Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, is challenging the one who's repeating this Braisa from his memory. Something is off. He's not challenging the din. But guys, if the pasuk is beginning to tell you, think about it, that a Balkeri has to leave Machna Shechina. When you leave Machna Shechina, which Machna do you enter? You can't fly. You enter Machna Leviyah. If Hashem wanted for him also to have to leave Machna Leviyah, then God should say he has to leave one Machna and leave the other Machna as well. Doesn't say that. It says leave the Machna, don't enter the Machna. Leave Machna Shechina, don't enter Machna Leviyah. Did he already leave Machna Leviyah for you to tell him not to enter Machna Leviyah? You have not brought his tumah into Machna Leviyah yet. You're already kicking him out. If he became Tomei in Machna Shechina, how did he get in there to tell him don't enter there? Or another version, same kasha, just saying it in a different way. He didn't yet leave Machna Leviyah. He is in Machna Leviyah, because when you tell a Jew that's a Machna Shechina, you have to leave. So where is he right now? If he leaves Machna Shechina, he's in the Machna Leviyah. So he did not yet leave Machna Leviyah. So Ayelte, you are addressing whether he can return or not? No, the Torah should have said leave and leave. Ella, so we're just we are adjusting the words in the Braisa. Ema, that when it says v'yotzel mechutz lamachna, you know what that means? Mechutz lamachna means he has to leave machna leviyah, which means that the balkedi became tamei while he is in machna leviyah, and God is saying, if you're in the machna leviyah, you have to leave. Now, when you leave machna leviyah, you have two boundaries, you have two borders. On one side, you have the machna shechina. On the other side, you have the machna Yisrael. So when you tell a yid that's a machna leviyah, you have to leave the machna leviyah. Hashem has to make it clear, yeah, but don't enter machna shechina. Leave in the other direction. Lo yavi al toicha machna zu machna shechina. Same limud. Point is a balkedi, a ish that has a mikra laila, which is a balkedi, may not be a machna leviyah, and that's a brayso. Maskiv la ravina. Hold on. Maybe the pasuk is taka speaking about someone who is in the machna shechina, to whom we say leave the machna shechina. Then when it says don't enter, it means that you're not allowed to enter. So there's a positive commandment to leave, and there's a lav not to enter. Maybe it's only about leaving machna shechina, and v'lavar olav ba'asei v'lo yisasei. Answers the Gemara, no. In Cain, if that would have been the scenario of the pasuk, then le'makra the Torah would have sufficed just to give an asay and a lav to say v'yotzel mechutz lamachna. That's the lav, right? That's the asay. Go out. V'lo yavoi el toich. Period. Don't come in. Don't come in. The word hamachna lamali is indeed shma minam liten loy machna cheres. The only way to learn pshat again was if the Torah only would have said leave. Then maybe the guy's a machna shechina, which would then mean leave only means machna shechina. The Torah has to speak out both sides, like we said in the updated version, that this person is a machna leviyah. And by the way, it makes a lot of sense, like we asked in the last year. How would someone become a balkedi in the machna shechina? Why would that happen? God forbid, it would never happen. Fakert, we're speaking about a Levi. And by the way, when machna leviyah moved to Harabayas, how would someone become a balkedi? You tell a balkedi, don't enter machna leviyah. You don't tell a balkedi, get out. How did he become a balkedi there? But in the midbar, machna leviyah, the Levium lived there. So if a Levi becomes a balkedi, which is that's the way, a married man, so you tell him, now that you became a balkedi, you have to leave. And leaving means leave machna leviyah into machna Yisrael. So again, that's another source. So we have two sources. We have Rab Shimon, and now we have the Nutana that equates the balkedi like a zav, even though Tmei Meis is more chomer than the balkedi, but for this din of banishment, he has to be out of not only machna shechina, but also machna leviyah. Okay. And now, almost for two daf, from now until daf samach tes amud beis, we're going to go back to the Mishnah on daf samach hey amud beis. So if you want to remember, the Mishnah began, Elu Dvarim, the 6th chapter began by telling us, Elu Dvarim Pesach, that is Doicha, Shabbos. Means if the 14th is on Shabbos, the Shechita, the Zrika, and the next statement was Michui Karavov. When we learned the Mishnah, we translated Michui means to rinse out the waste that's in the intestines. We're going to learn now exactly what the problem is. Now, if you were to leave the waste in the intestines until night, which is much as Shabbos, by then, the intestines might putrefy, they might dissolve, they might get ruined, and that's a bizui to kachim, even though we're speaking about intestines. So this is another action that you could do, even though it is Shabbos. Now, that is the way we teach the Mishnah. Now we'll see in the Gemara, really, there are two opinions in the translation of the word michui. When it says in the Mishnah michui karava v'chulei, asks the Gemara, my michui karava, what does it mean? First answer, Afuna says that the word michui comes from the word dissolution, says Rashi. Or another version of Rashi, the word michui comes from the word perforation. So shemenakvan bisakin. So when you have these intestines, if the waste is liquefied in it, if it's not yet hard, so all they needed to do is they needed to perforate. They made a hole in the intestines, and the waste would wash itself out. That's one type of michui. However, Chia Barav Omar, no, Shirka de Me'ayam, that the word michui Michui means putrid. That's the meaning of michui. And indeed, what do you need to do? You have to get rid of the putrid waste. How do you do that? That normally the waste in there is not that liquefied, that you're going to have to actually use a keli to, so to say, to purge those intestines by pushing it out. Omar Rabbi Lazar, my tama dechia bara, from where does he know that the word michui means putrid? Because according to the first Rav Huna, that macha, to be moicha, to dissolve, that's something Rashi brings. We find that elsewhere. We know that. Or if macha means perforation, Rashi also brings sources that perforation is connected to the word macha or michui. But when you're saying that the word michui is referring to that which is in itself putrid, to something that's waste, where do we have a source for that? So he says, Dechsiv, a pasuk in Yeshaya, and here's where it's going to bring us into the Agadata. So it says, V'charvois mechim, that the ruined homes of the mechin, we'll see the mechin means reshoim. That's the meaning of putrid. So what's going to happen? Gadim yochelu. Those who are considered gadim refer to tzaddikim, even though that normally the gadim, if you have a foreigner, he doesn't inherit that quick. He has to work for many generations to build up wealth. No, the pasuk says that the ruined homes from the mechem will be given over, will be consumed by the gadim. Now, my mashma, how do you know that mechem means something waste, something wasteful, or something putrid? So says the Gemara, Kiddim Etargim, Rabbi Yosef, that he teaches that the neschayim, the rishiyah, that the possessions of the wicked, that's the mechem, tzadik chaya yachsanun. The gadim refers to tzaddikim, that they will inherit. And now that we quoted the pasuk in Yeshaya, so in the beginning, we quoted now actually the end, the seif of the pasuk. Going back to the reish of the pasuk, it says that v'ro kivasim kidavram, and sheep will raise. Kidavram normally means as it is said, that sheep will graze as what is said. About whom was it said? Aman Menashe bar Yimri Amarav kimedubar bam. Yeah, that they will graze as it's mentioned. And my kimedubar bam. Oh. So now Abaye says Gavaldi. Now that you quoted the Targum of Rabbi Yosef, that the seif of the pasuk is saying that Gadim means tzaddikim, that the Gadim will consume the property of the Rishayim, that's the pshat. Amar Abaye v'charva ismechem Gadim yerchelu. In other words, that the ro kevasim, the sheep, refers also to tzaddikim. That a tzaddikim will graze as it's written right away in the pasuk. In other words, they're going to be gifted the possessions of the wicked. Amalei Rava, hold on. If the pasuk would not have used the letter vav, then you can read the whole pasuk as one statement. If it would have said the beginning of the pasuk is vero kevasim kidavram, and then if it would have continued that chayrvois mechem gedim yerchelu, good. It's kidduka amrat. It's one big hemshah. But hash the dichsiv. But now that it says, look inside the pasuk in Yeshaya, and there's a vav. The charvis means end is adding something else. There are two statements being made over here. It's not the same statement. Milsachita ka'amar. So Elamar Rava, indeed, kedrab Chanan Elamarav. The Amar Rab Chanan Elamarav, that Asidim, Tzadikim, Sheyichrios Ameis. That in the future, Tzadikim will actually bring the dead back to life. And even though we have in history, in the past, Elisha, twice it's recorded. We have Elyahu Hanavi, we have Yecheskel, the valley of the dry bones. But in the future, tzaddikim will be the ones through whom Tchias HaMeisim will happen. Or they will bring back the dead. How do we know that? It says over here, V'ro kavasim kidavram, that the sheep will graze. Like it's said about them, we'll see what that means. And again, the sheep refers to tzaddikim. And it says, a pasuk in Micha, that Yiru, Vashan, Vigilad, that Bashan and Gilad will graze. Ki yimei olam, the way they grazed in the days of yore, the way it happened in the past. Now, who is Bashan? Who is Gilad? So Taiches, old Rab Chanan Elamarav. Bashan is referring to Elisha the prophet. Why do we call him Bashan? Because he comes from Bashan. How do we know that? Because it says in Divrei Hayamim that V'ya'ani and Shaphat, they both are from Bashan. And it says, Poi Elisha ben Shaphat, Gavaldik. So Shaphat, so here we clearly see that he comes from Bashan, because Shaphat, it says in Divrei Hayamim, is in Bashan. Asher Yotzek, and this is the Elisha, the first white line, Asher Yotzek Mayim, that poured water al Yedei Elyahu on the hands of Elyahu Navi. That's our Elisha. Gilad is referring to Elyahu Navi, as it says, Vayomer Elyahu hatishbi, and the pasuk continues, mitoshvei Gilad. That's why many times we say, right, Elyahu hagiladi. Oh, so now it's Gavaldik. So when it says that Vero Kevasim Kidabram Gavaldik, that the sheep, the tzaddikim, they will graze the way they used to. Just like in the past, we had tzaddikim bringing back the mesim, so will be in the future. And Omar Rab Shmuel ben Achmeni, Omar Rab Yonason, Asidim tzaddikim sheichya mesim shenemar, another pasuk. Oid yeshvu zekenim uzikenos beruchayvis v'risholayim, that yet there will still be the time that zekenim and zekenos will be sitting in the streets of Yerushalayim. And the ish mishantoi biyadoi, each man with the staff in his hand, miroiv yamim. Literally, they'll be very old, and they're going to be walking around with walking sticks. Really, if you look at all the Hasidic Rebelach, they all go with a walking stick. Many of them use umbrellas in my time with a golden, with a silver something. But where does that come from? Because Elisha had his walking stick. Actually, when Elisha performed Tchias HaMesim, it says, "V'samta mishanti," I'm going to put my staff, where he told his helper that you get there before me, put my staff al penei hanar. So a walking staff is as a remez of the koyach of a tzaddik to perform Tchias HaMesim. I heard a gewaldige word from a yid here in Los Angeles that has to walk with a walking staff. I met him a while back. A big staff, like Moshe Rabbeinu's staff. It's like taller than him, and he's very proud. And he wears a nice, beautiful black yarmulke. And before I had a word, he says, why in the Oval Tzion do we say, Gavaldi, do we say that Hashem Elokei, Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yisrael Avosenu? Why not Elokei, Hashem Elokei, Abraham, Yaakov Avosenu? I think it's that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, if you look at the Soifei Tevois, Mem Kuf Lamed is Makel. So he says, I'm walking with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yisrael. But here we see something with the Mishanti, that the staff is something that's used to be Mechayim Mesim. So coming back, so the Zekenim and the Zekenois that are going to be sitting in the Rechavis Yerushalayim, not the Alta people, they need a stick. Don't forget that they're going to have the Koyach to use this stick that's going to be Mechayim Mesim. Ula Rami. This is Gavaldik Agadati here. Ula pointed out the following contradiction. It says, Bila Hamovas Lanetzach, that God will conceal, or God will swallow death forever. But it says in another pasuk, that if a person that died 100 years old, it will be a tragedy. It will be like someone today that's an infant, that's young, that dies. Okay, which means people are going to live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But there will be death, maybe when they come to 1,000. So will we never die, or will life simply be extended for many, many hundreds of years, the way it was maybe in the beginning of creation, right? People lived for 1,000 years. You have all the people that I mentioned in Bereshis. So the Gemara says, well, like Kasha, can be Yisrael, by Yidin, Bila Hamavas Lo Netzach, and can be Oivdei Kechavim, that they will live very long, but there's going to be death. Frek the Gemara, Oivdei Kechavim, my bo Hassan, they're going to be there. Zero says, of course, because it says, V'amdu Zadim V'roy Tzeinchem. Someone's got to work. It says that other people are going to go and they're going to do the work for you. Ubenei Nechan, and foreigners, they're going to work. Ikoreim v'kormeim, right? They're going to be your plowmen. They're going to be your vine dressers. In other words, Hashem created the world. The mission of the nations of the world is to make the world a civilized place and to build a place and technology and medicine, v'chulei v'chulei. So absolutely they will be there. Now, another contradiction. It says in one pasuk, the chafra halavana, that the moon will be abashed. The sun is going to be ashamed. The pshat will mean that in the future, they b'chlal will not be needed at all. So they'll be abashed, they'll be ashamed. There's going to be a light, the light that God actually had in the world revealed during the first 7 days of creation, that's going to come back. And then we don't need the sun, we don't need the moon, the way we had light on the first day of creation. B'chlal, Hashem created the heavenly bodies only on the fourth day. So how will there's light? That will be the light that's coming back. But it says in another pasuk, right, we say this by Kiddush Levana, which means that the heavenly luminaries will become a lot more empowered. but we're going to still use them. So the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. 7 times or 70 times like the light of the 7 days of creation. So it's going to be different, but we will still use their light. So which one will it be? So like kasha kan olam haba, and olam haba b'chlal, we won't need any of the sun and the moonlight, no matter how awesome it's going to become. And kan is liyamais HaMashiach, that there's going to be a sun, there's going to be a moon, they're going to be a lot more powerful, but we will still need it. According to the sheet of Shmuel, and the Rambam paskins like Shmuel, that the Amar ein bein olam hazeh liyamais HaMashiach elo shibud malchius bulvad. But it's not going to be miraculous. So ma'ikal meimar, because how can you say if the moonlight will become like the sunlight, that's much more than shibud malchius. So it says the Gemara that according to Shmuel, which one will it be? But like kasha, when will the b'chlal not be any sun and moonlight? That's going to be in the machna shechina. And kan, we will need the sun and the moonlight with the machna of the tzaddikim. Gewaldig. Says the Gemara weiter, Rava pointed out another contradiction. It says a pasuk, ani amis, I put to death, va'achaya, and I bring about life, I make live. It says in another pasuk, mochatzti, that I wound, and va'ani erpa, and I heal. So it's interesting that the Gemara begins with a contradiction, but this is not exactly a contradiction, but it's something is superfluous. It says, Rava, hashta achoye machaye, if God is going to bring everyone back to life, so of course God is going to heal. So manapoli kolchen. So only say that I put to death and I bring about life. Why do you have to mention about God is the one that really is the one that does the wounding and God is the one that does the healing? God wanted to make it clear that ma sha'ani meimis ani machaya. You would think if God would only say, Ani amis va'achaya, I put to death and I make life. You know what you would think? That Hashem is not speaking about the same person. God is the boss. Some people, their time came to die. Other people, their time came to live. But and that's not what God means. God is saying over here that the one that I put to death, that one is coming back to life. Tchias HaMesim. How does Hashem make it clear? When Hashem writes that I wound and I heal, there everyone understands what the pasuk means. The same one that was wounded, that's the one that gets healed. Actually, if a person is not wounded, they don't need to be healed. So, same thing as the reisha of the pasuk, that's the source, one of the sources. We're going to have the Solsugi and Sanhedrin, that from where do we see in the Torah that the Tchias HaMesim, that's one of the sources. And indeed, Tanach Rabbanan, Ani Amiz V'achayim. Right, this is very similar to Rava's statement. Perhaps Rava did not see the brayso. Yochel misa be'echad, v'chaim ba'acha be'echad. You might erroneously teach that the pasuk is saying that I put to death one person and I bring alive another person. Which is the way the world writes now. Right now, there's no tchias hamesim, but people are born and people pass away. So that's why God continues in the pasuk in the bottom. Machatzti v'ani erpa. That I wound and I heal, to make it clear, wounding and healing is in reference to the same person. And mikan teshuva lo imrim, that ain't tchias hamesim in the Torah. Yes, this is the pasuk, Dvarim Lamed Beis, ani amis va'achaya. That's a pasuk in Hazinu, and mochatzti v'ani erpa. Beautiful. Says the Gemara Vayter, Davar Acher. Another nuance of why does Hashem have to write the latter part of the verse? If the first part of the verse is that God is going to bring back the dead to life, then of course God can heal those that are wounded. Like pshita, it's not needed. No. So davar acher betchila masha ani memes ani machaya. Amazing. That God, when He's going to perform tchias hamesim directly, or like we just learned through the tzaddikim, or whether through the zakenim and zakenis v'rechayvis Yerushalayim, the people are coming back to life the way we remember them before they passed away. Which means that if a person had certain illnesses, they're going to first come back with that illness. And then God is going to heal them. First, they're going to come back to life, the way they were. And then, and then God is going to heal their ailments. And we're going to have more of this also in Ksubas. And there's a reason for that. Because if a person is going to come back to life, and they're going to come back young, they're going to come back healthy, and they're going to say, that I am so-and-so, people won't believe them. They're going to come back not only physically looking, they're going to come back with the white beard, and they're going to come back with Al and Nebuch, with all of, they're going to come back weiter, the knee is hurting, that's not functioning. For a short amount of time, everyone is going to know, oh, that's them. They're going to come, they're going to ask for all the real estate back. Our parents are coming back, the Zaydas, it's going to be like, they have to look exactly the same. Once they'll get the keys, boom, then God is going to heal them. And we'll start Nachama all the way from the beginning. Back to the Mishnah.
Take it, have it back. Gesundheit.
I'm 100% with you, Tzemach. 100%. I don't know if everyone over here says the same thing, but he can take it all back. Yeah, amen. I'm looking forward.
Rabbi, what did it mean by there's no Techias HaMeisim in the Torah?
No, there were people that claim that you don't have written in the 5 books of Moses that is Techias HaMeisim.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, it's not the end of the world. Not everything has to be written in the Chumash. The Torah is Torah Shebal Peh. But Techias HaMeisim is written in the Chumash, where, quote this pasuk in Hazino. Ani amis va'achaya, machatzti v'ani erpa. It's gewaldik. It's beautiful. And it has to mean the same person. Because you heal the one that you wounded, so it must mean that you bring back, God is going to bring back to life the same one that died. The ones who passed away, they're coming back. Okay. Weiter. You have to ask their spouses. It's not so pasha, this whole thing. It's going to be freilach. Samach, what do you say to that? Okay. Hekter Chelovov. So that was the last item mentioned in the Mishnah. That is Doiche Shabbos. Now, this is a big chiddush here. You know, it's Erev Pesach. It's Shabbos. I get it. Shchita you have to do. Zrika you have to do. You have to do Michui Keravav. You don't want to have a bazayin of Kachin. We learned so many times together that Hekter, Chelovim, Ve'evarim could be done at night. Actually, it's the first Mishnah Brachas. Really, it can be done all the way until the morning. Go until midnight, but it could be done at night. Now, one would think that since you can burn all of the fats from the Korban Pesach at night on Yom Tov, you can burn food and fire, right? There's no violation of Shabbos. The Mishnah says, no, you do it on Shabbos. And Tanya says, the Gemara, Amar Rab Shimon, kama chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Come and see how beautiful and how important is doing the mitzvah in the right time. From this din, Sharei Hekter Chalav Mevarim Upedarim Ksherim Kol Halayla, but ve'ein mamtina lehem at shetech. We know when you do it on day on Shabbos. Now it's very important to note that there is a similar but not to be confused statement or idea of Zrizin Magdim El Mitzvahs. Zrizin Magdim El Mitzvahs is a concept, is an ethic on the person. That if I should aspire to be a zariz, to be diligent, and do the mitzvah ASAP, that's on me. Here, we're speaking about the mitzvah itself, aside of the concept of zarizus, that it's since chaviva mitzvah bishaita, since it's ideal for the hekter chalavim ve'evarim u'pedarim to happen during the day, so the mitzvah belongs to the day. The fact that we can sort of say, if you didn't do it during the day, you can also do it at night, but that chavivus is so powerful that, yes, it overrides Shabbos itself. And now we start the 3 items in which the Mishnah began quoting the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. And again, later we're going to go to Rabbi Akiva that got involved, but we're going to focus today on Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. What were the examples the Mishnah gave? 3 examples. Har kovasai. So the animal was somewhere in Yerushalayim or somewhere in the Tchum, but this Shepsela Nebuch can't walk. It's a gaitnish. So you have to carry it. And Rashi told us in the Mishnah that we are following the Shita that Chai Noises Atzmai, which means that if you carry the animal biblically, you're not violating Shabbos. You're not violating Yitzhak. But rabbinically, you are. If you're not going to carry the animal, you won't have an animal. Or the animal is B'chlal Chutz L'machna. The animal can walk on its own, but you have to walk in chutz l'chutzi. My possessions cannot be transported beyond the machna. 3rd example was cutting the wart. Again, the way we learned the Mishnah, cutting the wart with a shinoi, which means you're not violating a doiraisa, it's only a derabanan. On these 3 machlokes, Tanakama, which was Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Eliezer. Here's a big problem. Problem is like this, that I get that Rabbi Yeshua holds that any preliminary, any machshir that you could have done before Shabbos, not doiches Shabbos. But guys, don't forget that cutting the wart is being done in the Beis HaMikdash. Let's not forget that there is another layer here, Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. We're going to have to address all of that. It's why even Rabbi Yeshua that holds that anything that could have been done before Shabbos, well, Rabbi Akiva says that at the end of the Mishnah. It's not doiches Shabbos, but Ein Shvus B'Mikdash is a universal rule. So let's read it inside. So it says the Gemara, guys, we learned this. We're chazering now. For those of us that missed Eruvin, we'll get back to it in a couple of years. Here we have a Mishnah in Eruvin that has to be reconciled with our Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, you are allowed to cut a word in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? First of all, I mean, we'll unpackage it here in a couple of moments. But that was in the sugya of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. Cutting a wart, just to make it clear, cutting a wart that is moist with a proper utensil is called goizes. Interesting. Goizes normally means shearing hair, but it doesn't only mean shearing hair. Any part of the animal that you are removing properly is goizes. However, and no biblical violation can be done in the Beis HaMikdash, but there are ways of removing a wart b'shinoi, and that's only midrabanan and Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. The Mishnah says, Avoloi b'Medina. And the Mishnah adds, but if you're using a proper utensil, then kam v'kanasa. So the problem is, I get that the Tanach is following the rule that any machshirei Pesach is not doiche Pesach, not doiche Shabbos. But hold on, Chatichas Yabalta is in the temple. So here, guys, we had this over there, Nachamal over here, Rabbi Elazar, the Amoida, and Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina, the other Amoida. Each one gave a different answer, and then we'll have to see why one doesn't give the answer of the other. Chad Amar, Idi, both Psachim and the Mishnah in Eruvin is speaking about someone removing the wart biyad, which is only the Rabbanon. But however, if the wart is moist, even though you are removing it with your hand, not every shvus do we say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. We're still afraid if you're removing it biyad, you might remove it b'keli. And let's add to a detail, you could have done it before Shabbos. Hello, you woke up right now, you can't do that. Here we say Shvus B'Mikdash. The Mishnah in Eruvin that says you can do it in the temple, that's b'yavesha. The wart is very dry. When the wart is very dry, really it crumbles. It's b'chlal not goizes. It's like a non-issue. You're not shearing anything. It just, it crumbles out. Okay, that's one approach. The other Amoyed says, no, either b'lacha. Like the Gemara will say, if it's speaking about a wart that's so dry that you getting rid of it is like it crumbles off, of course it's a non-issue. We don't need a Mishnah for that. No, both the wart is moist. Yeah, I got to cut it off. Wow. Habiyad, b'habikeli. The Mishnah Eruvin says clearly, biyad, you could do it, Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. Our Mishnah is telling you that you may not do it, b'keli. In other words, you can do shchita on the Pesach, which is a biblical violation because Pesach is doiche Shabbos. But something that you could have done before doesn't violate the Shabbos. So according to this, the Mishnah gave 3 examples. 2 of them are the Rabbanans, and 1 of them is the Doiraisa. You can't ask, well, if the Mishnah is telling you that even a Rabbanan cannot be done, for sure not a Doiraisa, that's not a kasha. The Mishnah is giving examples, some Doiraisa and some Rabban. Now, Ulaman the Amar Habiyad v'Habikeli. Why didn't he? My Tamali Amar Idvi Bayad. Why didn't one give the answer of the other? Amalach will tell you that since Yevesha, if the wart is completely dry, Mifrach Perechet crumbles. By the way, I'll tell you more. If it crumbles, why can't you use a keli? Oh, the Mishnah in Eruvin is that it's dry. Use a keli if it's dry. Why didn't he give the other answer? My so Amalach keli hak tani hasam. The prohibition to remove it with a keli is written explicitly in the Mishnah of Eruvin that we just quoted. And now the Gemara is repeating the quote that in bekeli kan v'kan asam. So why would we need to have a Mishnah over here to add, to say something that we learned already? However, ve'idach, this is going to be answered. Ve'idach chadik tani keli hachem. And a chanami, that the Tanakama, which is Rabbi Yeshua, holds that you can't be Machal Shabbos to cut off a wart with a keli. We don't need the Mishnah here. The Chiddush would be that even a Darabanan cannot be done. But the more important thing is, don't forget that we're learning now Shitas Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you may do it. And now it's Gavaldik. Now it flips. So according to this approach, our Mishnah is not only saying that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbanans are going to be pushed aside because he holds that Machshirei Pesach are also doicha. Even a biblical violation will get pushed aside. So yeah, the Mishnah over there already said that the Keli is asad even by Migdash, but our Mishnah is adding the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Bottom line is, there's no contradiction, and we have both of these approaches that are good. Now, the Gemara is beginning to go to where they argued. So if you push it, you have to remember their argument. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's doicha. And Rabbi Eliezer says, I have a kal v'chomer. What was this kal v'chomer? I'm just reading back quickly in the Mishnah Samachem of the base. That if shchita, that's a bona fide malacha, is doicha Shabbos. So the other three, let's go at least 2 out of the 3, or 3 out of the 3, that you're doing something that's only us and midrabanan. So of course it's going to be doicha shvus. If something can be doicha doiraisa, it can be doicha adrabanan. So Rabbi Yeshua says no. Rabbi Yeshua says that Yom Tov will show that's not correct. You can shecht on Yom Tov because it's oichel nefesh, but shchita is a doiraisa. Nevertheless, he gives an example that if the animal is chutz l'tchum, on Yom Tov you can't break a tchum, you can't break a drabanan. Just because sometimes you can break a doiraisa doesn't mean for sure you can break the drabanans. To which Rabbi Eliezer tells him, and he calls him Yeshua. He says, what are you talking about? He says, shechting on Yom Tov is not a mitzvah b'chlal. Shechting on Yom Tov is only a mitzvah. That was the end. Rabbi Yeshua didn't respond. Rabbi Akiva gets involved from now on. We're going to leave Rabbi Akiva for next daf. Now hold on. Let me ask you something. Shechting on Yom Tov is reshus. Isn't there a mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov? Isn't there a mitzvah to have a meal on Yom Tov? If there's a mitzvah, then it's called a mitzvah. So this actually, now you get it, that this machlokes in the Mishnah is contingent, is based on this machlokes that we're going to learn right now, which is gavaldik. So Rabbi Yeshua L'taimei, Rabbi Yeshua doesn't even respond to Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah. He doesn't need to, because Rabbi Yeshua holds, says the Gemara, that Simchas Yom Tov. Simchas Yom Tov means here eating and drinking is a mitzvah. So yeah, so he has a good proof. So he has a good response to Rabbi Eliezer. Mitzvah shchita Yom Tov is mutter. It's a mitzvah to eat. But if the only animal you have is outside the tchum, you can't break tchum. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein lo adam Yom Tov elo o yochel v'shoisa o yoshev v'shoina. You have a choice to make. You could choose. You can fulfill your joy, beruchnias or begashmias. He's not saying you can't do both. He's saying that you don't need to do both. You have to have simcha. If someone wants to fulfill their simcha by eating and drinking, good. Mitzvah. If you want to fulfill your simcha by sitting and learning, good. Rabbi Yeshua says no. You need both. Dafke. Chal keyu. You have to divide the day. Divide the day doesn't mean 50-50. It means you have to have both. Chetzia la'achila v'shasiyah. Part of the day should be for begashmias, and part of the day should be beruchnias. You have to have both. And
can you do the bedikas and the hadacha and malicha and everything on Yom Tov too?
Absolutely.
What if? But you need a certain amount of time. Can you do it later in the day if you're going to run out of time?
You can only shecht it when it's possible for that which you are shechting to be consumed on that day. Ein Yom Tov meichel l'choil. We learned this together. By the way, this is emes today. It's emes today. Today you are allowed to shecht on Yom Tov. Just we're living in a city and people don't shecht the way it used to be. But not that long ago when people would bring the chicken to the sheikh, you can do this on Yom Tov. It's fresher. Okay. I want you to know this machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua is Vishnei Mikra Echad Darshu, that they both expounded from the same pasuk. That calls of Echad Omer in one pasuk it says, and we're quoting a pasuk in the A, Atzeres Lashem Elokecha. Guys, look in that pasuk and you will see that pasuk is speaking about Shvi'i Shal Pesach. in Eretz Yisrael, there's no, that's Achron. So the Chol HaMoed, you can do some work, and then it says, but on the last day, you got to refrain from working. Now, really, Atzeres means either to refrain. Atzeres also means a day of gathering, to be Mesameach. So we're calling Shviur Shal Pesach Atzeres, but to whom? To whom? Lashem Alekecha. It says in another pasuk in Pinchas, it says Atzeres. Now, interesting, the pasuk in Pinchas is not Shviur Shal Pesach. The pasuk in Pinchas is Shmini Atzeres. But it doesn't say Atzeres Lashem Alekecha. It says Atzeres Tihiyeh Lochem. Now, you got a problem. It's your gathering for whom? For you or for God? Rabbi Eliezer holds fakert, either or. Oy kulo Lashem, oy kulo lachem. This is Sukkot and Pesach. Rabbi Yeshua Oy Me'asava, no. One teaches the other. Chalkeyu chetzir Lashem v'chetzir lachem. When people learn this, they think that Rabbi Eliezer is more ruchniistic, right? Rabbi Eliezer is allowing a yid to fulfill Simchas Yontif only Yoshev v'Shoina. Al pi Chasidus, it's not that way. The whole kavana of Dira B'Tachtonim is to take a ruchniistic idea and to concretize it, to bring it down. Fakert. Rabbi Yeshua is the one that holds, and we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer Shamutehi. We paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. That's the whole word, that it's even greater when you take a ruchniistic celebration and you bring it into a Seudah Smitz. And let's go weiter. And for the next Avam Simen, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Even though we had a machlokes, yeah, good. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, but Hakol Moedim, but Atzeres, he wants you to keep you on the toes. This Atzeres is Shavuos. That Atzeres the Be'inan Amalochem. Everyone holds that for Shavuos you have to have the lochem also. My tama, because Yom Shenitna by Torah. Without Chasidus, I have no idea how people learn this Gemara. What kind of logic is that? Yom Shenitna by Torah. Rabbi Eliezer will say, what are you talking about? For sure you can fulfill Simchas Shavuos by learning the whole Shavuos. No, since Shavuos, what was Shavuos al pi Chasidus? It was Dira B'Tachtonim. It was Hashem was Mavatal the Gzeira, that something that was in the heavens came down to earth. So how are you going to celebrate Shavuos? By going to the heavens? That's the antithesis of Shavuos. Shavuos is to go to the heavens and to bring it down. How do you do that? By bringing it down in a Seudah Gashmi. And Amar Rabba, another statement, that Hakoil Moedim, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, the Shabbos, the Be'inan Nami Lochem. Shabbos, you have to have a meal. You can't Shabbos Beruchnius. My tamo, because it says, Vikarasal Shabbos Oineg, not Simcha. Oineg, let's go again on Pi Chasidus. Oineg is Pnimius Atik. Oineg is the highest level. And no, it's Tchilasan Dafke B'Soifan. So where do you have an expression of Oineg B'Gashmius? So you have to have both. Now, God forbid, only to have Gashmias. No, you go up. Moshe Rabbeinu went up, and then he brought the Torah here. Rabbi Yosef, Hakol Moedim, Bepurim. Wow. The Be'inan Nami Lochem. My Tame, you may Mishnah v'Simcha Ksiv Bei. So Simcha, we had a machlokes. But Mishnah has to mean Begashmias. Says the Gemara Mar, Berei de Ravina. Kula Shata Hava Yosef B'Tanisa. He fasted. Labar Miatzarta means he fasted on Yom Tov. He never fasted Shavuos. He did not fast on Purim, and he did not fast on Malad Yom Kippurei, on Erev Yom Kippur. These are the 3 days in which he followed the Shita of Rabbi Yeshua. Atzeres, why, like we said above, you have to eat as well as celebrating the day Beruchnius, because Yom Shenitna about Torah, and that's the whole kavan of the Torah. Puria Nami Me Mishnah v'Simcha Ksiv, says in the Mishnah. Mali Yom Kippurei, why did he not fast then? The Tani Chia Barav from the city of Difti, when it says in Parshas Emoid, V'inisam es nafshay seichem b'tisha, not meiti, not from the 9th day, in the 9th day. You fast in the 9th day of the month. Ella loimelach. Kala oichel v'shoise b'tisha boi malo olava kosov ke'ilu mesanat shiva siri. So therefore, yes, he dafka ate on the 9th day. You know that Rebbe's father's minig that was the only day of the year that he would use 2 pieces of cutlery to eat. Normally, he dafka refrained from doing so. You eat with your fork, eat with one hand. He ate with the fork and a knife, or with the fork and a fork, because it's a mitzvah to eat them. Rabbi Yosef, the Yoima dat Sarta Oimer. On Shavuos, Rabbi Yosef says that of the li igla tilsa, prepare for me an igla tilsa. We have throughout the machloikas, the 2 opinions. Either it means a calf that was slaughtered when it's only in a third of its development, so it's tender, it's the best quality, or igla tilsa means it's the calf born the third to its mother. That is the greatest quality. For all you guys that you're the 3rd child, that's gavaldik. Oh, and so he made the most delicate su'uda, and he says, Eloi hayyim de kagarim. If not for this day that came about, kama Yosef ike b'shuka. How many other Yosefs do you have in the market? I would have been indistinguishable from all the other ones. So how did he celebrate that? By eating. And the way that Rebbe points out that, again, Ilgo Tilsa, that you have one is Ruchnius, one is Hashem Echad. Number 2 represents the world, Gashmias, which is a separation from our perspective, initially from godliness. And the Koyach of 3 is that which brings them together. And the whole idea of Matan Torah, as we have in the Sugya and Shabbos, everything with 3, that the Torah is Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim, that the Torah was given through Moshe Rabbeinu, who's Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe. The Torah was given on the 3rd month, that the Yidden are divided in Kahanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. The whole sugya there of 3s is because that's the whole nekuda, that when you want the greatest level is not to live Beruchnius, but it's to bring it down in this world. And that is done by having a Su'udas mitzvah. B'chlal in Yiddishkeit, everything is a Su'udas mitzvah. And that's the reason for that. Because that's bringing the Torah all the way down. Now, that everyone speaks out that even greater than that, there are many minhagei Yisrael where we eat, making a siyum. It's not an obligation. We make a su'uda. Bayos, a fabrengen, we have something to eat. Because the Rebbe says that the real dira b'tachtonim, whenever there's a mitzvah, so of course the mitzvah is gashmi, but it's a mitzvah. But whenever there's no mitzvah, but you're eating something, which is a representation of the physical living, connected to something ruchni, that's the greatest thing. That's the greatest level of dira b'tachtonim. Right. Rab Sheshes called to us in Yomin, Mahadalei Talmudei. Rab Sheshes hazard everything. Rab Sheshes knew the entire Torah. It took him 30 days to review it. And v'toli v'koye be'ibra the and he would stand and lean on the bolt of the doorway. Again, the doorway is what connects 2 different environments. That's what we're speaking about. And v'amar, and he would say, Chadoy nafshoi, rejoice my soul. He was speaking to his neshama, that l'cha kiroi, I learned Torah for you, my neshama. L'cha tanoi, I read psukim for you, I learned Torah Shabbat Peh for you. Says he went, whoa. He was saying that he learned it for him. No, Eini. The first white line in Mole, Torah was not for the neshama. Back to the same, this all Pi Chasidus, the whole thing is one hemshech. The kavan of Torah is to bring God into the world. So Chadoi world that Yidden are keeping mitzvahs, not Chadoi my soul. Shenemer, as it says in Yirmiyahu, that im loy berisi yom v'layla, chukar shemaim aretz loy samti, and that the way we touch the pasuk. That only because the Yidden are keeping the covenant, which includes all the mitzvahs, that is what's keeping the heaven standing. That's what's keeping the earth standing. So the Gemara says, Enachanami. The emes is that the kavan of Torah is to bring it down to Gashmias. But no, not everyone begins there. Begins on that level. When he began his avodah, he went to a yeshiva where they told him, you're going to learn Torah, you're going to go to Gan Eden. So he began doing the avodah for him, for his neshama. Good. And then he developed and he chapped that it's not about him. It's about the Oibishter. And not about the Oibishter in the heavens. It's about God here in this world. Omar Avash. So Bekitzer, coming back to the Mishnah, So the Gemara was gavaldik. The Gemara explained that the back and forth Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua is really this machloikes. So you would think, after you just learned the shtickle Gemara, that the only reason why Rabbi Eliezer's shita, Rabbi Eliezer's refutation, did not take a slug up Rabbi Yeshua, because Rabbi Yeshua disagrees with him. Because Rabbi Yeshua holds that eating and therefore shechting on Yom Tov is a mitzvah. Says Ravashi Gavaldik, right? 3 lines from the bottom. That ulamai de ka'amar Rabbi Eliezer name Yom Tov reshus, even if Rabbi Yeshua would agree to Rabbi Eliezer, and even if shchita on Yom Tov is not a mitzvah, because according to Rabbi Eliezer, you don't have to eat on Yom Tov, you can spend the whole day in the base Midrash. Still, he has a response. Still, he won't agree with Rabbi Eliezer. Islay pircha. And what will be the pircha? That my Yom Tov shehikter by malacha shel reshus. Take reshus. But what did we allow for the sake of a reshus? No one debates that on Yom Tov you can shecht. Let's say there's no mitzvah to eat, but it's a reshus. What can you break? Shchita, a malacha. Nevertheless, like I mentioned, if the animal that you have available is chutz l'tchum, no one is allowed to bring that animal on Yom Tov to the tchum to shecht it. In other words, even when that which is more serious, shchita, could be broken, it doesn't automatically mean that which is normally considered less serious can be broken as well. We don't say that. So Shabbos, shaloi hitir ba ela melacha shal mitzvah. So einoi din, so enachanami. A malacha can be done. You can shecht, but not a shvus. Is avade, since to begin with everything is more chamur. Einoi din, sholei tater shvus she'imel at shvir inside Rashi 6 lines from the bottom. Mamash masu kidvash that omas simchas yontev shehi reshus and v'hitarta by malacha. Yet lo hitarta by mishum shvus. So Shabbos sheloi hitarta ba ela meleches mitzvah, only meleches mitzvah, which is shchitas karbonis tzibur. Can't shecht a normal animal. Which Shabbos is more chamur. So for sure, no shvus will be allowed, even for the mitzvah. Ein adin sheloi tatra shvus afil mitzvah. Oh, so 1 second. So why? So what did Rabbi Eliezer say? So why doesn't this Bechlal completely take away Rabbi Eliezer's argument? Just to finish the top line of Samachtes. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer says that no, that shvus the mitzvah adaflei. Look inside the Rashi. The Rabbi Eliezer amalach. Hi, what you just said, your Ravashi is not a Kal V'Chomer, because a shvus connected to a mitzvah is more important than a shvus of a reshus. And therefore, we should be more lenient. But if there would be no obligation involved, so then don't break a rabbinic. But that's Takashitas Rabbi Eliezer. But since Hashem says that for the mitzvah of Pesach, the mitzvah overrides Shabbos. Pesach. So once the biblical violation is pushed aside because of the mitzvah, so therefore he holds that avade, a shvus, will certainly be pushed aside as well, and God willing, to be continued.
Yeah.
All right, Chedra, this is the Gavaldik Kadaf over here. Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Samach Tes. The Gemara in the beginning of the Amud will continue to quote a Braisa that expounds upon the back and forth that we had in the Mishnah Daf Samach Hei Amud Beis, beginning with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. So some of their back and forth is recorded in the Mishnah. We're going to have another shtickle recorded in a Braisa, and then we're going to go to Rabbi Akiva, because as we're going to review the Mishnah Samach Hei Amud Beis, after Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva had their back and forth as it's written, then the Mishnah says that Heishiv Rabbi Akiva, and he spoke about Haza'ah. And then we learned in the Mishnah that it seems like there is a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva regarding Haza'ah, whether Haza'ah, the seventh day, the Haza'ah that's done on the seventh day to a Tmei Meis, could be done on Shabbos. And as we spoke on in the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to speak about Bachlal, what's the issue with Haza'ah? Well, it's definitely not an Isur Doiraisa. It might be an Isur of Tikkun Midrabanan. It might be a Gzeira that you might end up carrying the Meichatas B'Reshus Harabim, but it's an Isur Darabanan. And when you learned the Mishnah, it sounded like Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua were debating whether Haza'ah is permitted on Shabbos or not, and as it will become clear in the Gemara that indeed they have no such a machlokes. There's going to be Gavaldik, behind the story regarding this Mishnah. The Mishnah had very sharp expressions. We're going to chazer the whole Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer said something, Rabbi Akiva said something. We're going to actually get an insight. It's very difficult to understand this, but Rabbi Akiva had a horrible death. He was skinned alive by the Romans. And some of that was because of this conversation between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, when Rabbi Eliezer expressed himself in a very sharp way, because there was a misunderstanding. Rabbi Akiva actually was a Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer. There was something that Rabbi Akiva learned from Rabbi Eliezer, and he was trying to remind him of a teaching that he thought Rabbi Eliezer forgot. Now, normally when people are peers, you tell your chaver, hey, you forgot something. But it's not respectful to tell your Rebbe you forgot something. So he used a certain logic, which his kavanah was to remind Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer got very insulted, and we'll learn many more details about it. Now, we're also going to speak about the following. If the person's seventh day is Takan Erev Pesach, which means even if they do everything they need to do, which is they get the water sprinkled on them and they go to the mikvah, or a Tamei Sheretz, that's only tummy for one day, does he bring the Pesach Rishon, or is he defer to Pesach Sheni? More details of this. This is a machlokes that we're going to learn on Daf Tzadik, but we're going to bring that machlokes over here. There's going to be nuances in that machlokes. We're going to have phenomenal insights in better understanding the relationship between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, or Pesach Sheni and Pesach Rishon. What happens if no one brought the Pesach Rishon to you? I'll bring a Pesach Sheni v'chulei, and all of that will be to clarify the Rabbi Akiva's involvement in this machlokes, and ultimately it's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara is going to link this machlokes. We mentioned this to the machlokes we had on Shabbos, Kuflamed, by Machshirei Mila, whether Machshirei Mila Doicha Shabbos, it's the same machlokes. In both scenarios, we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. B'chlal, it's good to remember that Rabbi Eliezer is called Shamutei. Either it means that he was put into a cherem, which he was, but that's and therefore we normally don't paskin like him. It also means that he generally followed Shammai, and again, the rule is that Shammai, the Makim Besilul, is not even a Mishnah. And if we'll have time, we're going to start the new Mishnah on Daf Samach Tesamid Beis. The new Mishnah is going to be a link. It's going to be a hemshech, as the Gemara will explain how, but we will introduce the following. On every Yom Tiv, there is an obligation for us, for the men who are fulfilling the mitzvah of going up to the Beis HaMikdash, not only to bring a carbon oilas ri'iyah, carbon oilo that's completely burnt on the Mizbeach, but we also have an obligation to bring a chagigas Yom Tiv. The chagiga is a type of carbon shlamim. Ideally, it should be brought on the first day of Yom Tiv, even though if you did not, you have the Yemei Tashlumin, and it's eaten by the owners. Those parts that could be eaten are eaten by the owners for 2 days and 1 night. That's Chagigas Yom Tiv. And by the way, Pesach is included. So Pesach, the first day of Pesach, there's an obligation for all the men to bring the Oilas Re'iyah and a Chagiga. However, what we will start learning on Taf Samach Tesam and Beis, we're going to be using the word Chagiga, but we're not talking about the obligation biblically to bring a Chagiga on the first day of Yom Tiv. We're going to learn about another mitzvah that was optional, that wasn't always needed. The Karban Pesach should be eaten to one's satisfaction. In other words, you should not eat the Karban Pesach and be hungry. We're not supposed to, God forbid, stuff ourselves. That doesn't make you feel satisfied. That makes a person feel not well. Now, if there is enough meat in this shepsela for our little group that we can all eat enough meat to go from being hungry to becoming satisfied, then that's good. Shalom al Yisrael. But it was very common because of the fear that people had that you have to finish the Korban Pesach that night, until midnight. So therefore, they had many people pre-registered. Everyone was designated a kazayas or two, and I don't get full with a kazayas unless it's the shiur of the Chazon Ish. But the normal kazayas, you're not going to be hungry. So in order not to remain hungry, they offered a korban chagiga known as chagigas Yudalid, chagiga of the 14th day. They would eat that chagiga, and they would not eat it until they're fully satisfied, but they would eat it until they're almost satisfied, and then the final thing they would eat will be the korban Pesach. So we're going to be learning pratim about that chagigas Yudalid. Like, for example, that chagiga is not doiche Shabbos. It's not like Pesach. We're going to learn really that in 3 ways, it's not like the korban Pesach. Okay, but the bulk of the daf until the new Mishnah is going to be, again, a hemshech to the Mishnah daf Samachem base. If you're watching this, based not live, pause and go back to the Mishnah, guys. Learn the Mishnah clear. It's wow, because as great as the Mishnah is, now you're going to begin learning the story behind the story. So we finished on daf Samach in the last daf. We learned a lot of back and forth that we didn't have in the Mishnah between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and now we'll continue. Before we come to Rabbi Akiva, so Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, guys, the second line on top of the Amid, Omar Rabbi Eliezer, Umali as our expression, and what reason do I have? Why would I prohibit Machshirei Pesach on Shabbos? Im dochu Machshirei Mitzvah Shela'achar Shchitas HaShabbos. Gavaldik. In other words, after you did the shchita, even though the isavid lay mitzvah, nevertheless, there are certain things that we may do. For example, guys, what did we learn? Michui karavav. Michui karavav is not essential, right? We don't want to have a bezoin kachim. The mitzvah was fulfilled. You did the shchita, you did the zrika. Nevertheless, even though it's not the essential part of the avodah, you shechted the animal. The Mishnah says, L'kula alma. You do the michui karavav on Shabbos. So it says Rabbi Eliezer is lo yitchu machshirei mitzvah shalifnei shchitas haShabbos. If you didn't even do shchita, if you're not going to go carry the animal, if you're not going to bring the animal chutz l'tchum, you won't even have the main mitzvah. It's a more important machshirei. For sure, it's doich Shabbos. Oh, this is Rabbi Akiva. Again, none of this is written in the Mishnah. So Amalei Rabbi Akiva, he responded to the words umali. It's like almost poetic. So he says, Dimali, no, punkt verkehrt. Why would I accept your argument? Im doch machshirei mitzvah la'achar shchitas haShabbos. You know why? Yeah, Michli Karavav is done. You know why? Look at the svara here. Shaharei dachsa shchitas haShabbos. You already broke the Shabbos because Hashem wanted us. So you already broke the Shabbos, so go do Michli Karavav. Break it further. I know you can counter that, God forbid, break what you are allowed to and don't break what you're not allowed to. But this is what Rabbi Akiva responded. But if you didn't shecht yet, there is no animal yet. To bring the animal, you have to break the Shabbos. No. You didn't shecht yet. No, Shabbos was not broken yet, so you're not allowed to do it. Another version. Now we're going to say that this version could not have happened. But again, we're learning a Braisa, and it was common that Braisas got corrupted, and the Gemara is going to actually clarify that this Braisa is not correct. But let's begin. Another version that Rabbi Akiva tells Rabbi Eliezer, how can you tell me that you can carry the animal on your shoulders? It's asur the Rabbanon, for the mitzvah. Let me ask you, what's going to happen if you shech the animal, and it turns out the animal is not good? For example, you discover the animal is a treifa. Now, obviously, there are those simani treifas, like we learned in Chulin, that you can discern, you can tell before the animal was slaughtered. But there are certain blemishes, right? A hole in the lung, a sircha that passes in the lung, that you can't tell only until after shchita. So shema yimsa zevach pasel, maybe you're going to shech, and then you're going to discover the animal is pasel. Then yimsa mechal shabbos l'mafreya. So said, according to this version, Rabbi Akiva to Rabbi Eliezer says the Gemara, no. He didn't say that. Because if we have such a fear when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, how were we allowed to shecht any animal on Shabbos? Right? Tamid doich Shabbos. How? Maybe you're going to shecht and you're going to discover the animal is not kosher. And the answer is that no, we can't make those cheshbonos. But God forbid it should be that way. We do everything we could. The animal looks like it's okay. Hashem tells us shech the tamid b'mayadoi, as we learned a few daf ago. Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi al oilas hatamid. That's the source. So you do the shechita and Pesach mayadoi. We learn Gzeira Shava. Elo ha Amar le bereisha. I'm sorry. The Bryce is not corrupted. The order of the Bryce is corrupted. Really, this was the first response. But right away, uparche. V'hadar amalei ha the mali imdachui. It's first. You can't do it because you might break the Shabbos. The response to that is then how can you b'chlal shecht? So that refuted that argument. But then again, the Amar Rabbi Lazar, the Umali, and Rabbi Akiva responded this expression of the mali imdachu. Okay, so that's another whole back and forth that we didn't have in our Mishnah that we have now in the Bryce. And now the Gemara is quoting what we do have in our Mishnah. Now this is not Samach Vav, this is still Samach Chayom Beis. You see, it's Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and if you look in the Mishnah, 4 lines from the wide lines, Hey Shiv Rabbi Akiva v'Amar, Hazo Otochiach. Now, guys, we have to read the Mishnah, Pasha, to have it clear in the forefront to appreciate what the back and forth over here. What did Rabbi Akiva tell him? Rabbi Akiva tells him, don't refute Rabbi Yoshua, because you said that Shechita and Yom Tov is Rishus. That was the sugi we learned in the last daf. Okay, Naniach, put that aside. Sprinkling the mechatos is a mitzvah. Why is it a mitzvah? Because if you don't have that purification, you cannot bring the Korban Pesach, right? And the prohibition is only midrabanan. And Rabbi Akiva says, yet hazah cannot be done. Now, Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Akiva, I disagree with you. Hazah could be done. If that would have ended there, Shalom al Yisrael. But on Tzamach Vav, then he went on. And he went on to say, Rabbi Akiva tells him, no, Rabbi Eliezer. First of all, Hazah cannot be done. And not only that, remember those words in the Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva tells Rabbi Eliezer, I have a Kal V'chomer now. Hazah, that's only a rabbinic problem, may not be done. So even shechit of the Pesach should not be done. Now everyone knows that the shechit of the Pesach overrides Shabbos. And Amar Loi Rabbi Eliezer, I'm reading back in the Mishnah, Akiva, Okarta Mashakosov Batoira, Bimoyadoi. And Rabbi Akiva right away says, yeah, Rebbe, you're right. Don't forget, Rabbi Eliezer was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. He says, fine. He says the Pesach you can shecht it on Shabbos because the Pesach God writes bin moyad, do it in its appointed time. With all due respect, the rabbinics, the carrying the animal to the Azara could have been done before. You don't have to carry it on Yom Tov. You don't have to. So that's something, as he concludes, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. Now it's very strange when we learned the Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva, even for a moment, was telling Rabbi Eliezer, Kodim Kol Hazah cannot be done, and actually even Shechita cannot be done. Rabbi Akiva thought, Rabbi Eliezer thought that Rabbi Akiva was making fun of him, and that was tragic. So let's read now the Gemara inside. Hey, Shev Rabbi Akiva v'Amir Hazah Techiach. Tanya, that when Rabbi Akiva made this, you're wrong with Hazah. And Rabbi Eliezer said Hazah could be done. Rabbi Akiva says Hazah cannot be done. Then he goes further. Hazah cannot be done, and even Shechita cannot be done. Tanya Amar Rabbi Eliezer Akiva b'Shechita Hey Shaftani, right? Hey Shaftani here means that in an irreverent way, in a mocking way, you're making chayzik of me. You're coming with a Kal V'chomer to tell me that for some reason Shechita of the Pesach cannot be done. B'Shechita tehei misasei, may your passing be through Shechita. This is why Beruchnius, ultimately Begashmius, the Romans tortured Rabbi Akiva to death. And there's a lot on this. So hold on. So when Rabbi Akiva heard that, Amar Loi, we said this in the introduction, there was some misunderstanding over here. Rabbi Eliezer heard that he was being disrespected, but that was mamish not what happened over here. Rabbi Akiva, from whom did Rabbi Akiva know that you don't do hazah? He heard it from Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that taught it to him. And here Rabbi Eliezer is saying, I disagree with hazah. Hazah could be done. So Amalei Rebbe al tachbireni b'shasadin. I know we're having a big din. Din doesn't mean a judgment. It means we're debating. Don't deny, don't deny the truth to upkeep your position. Kach mikoblani mimcha. You taught me. You, my teacher, Rabbi Eliezer, taught me that hazah is taka only a shvus, yet hazah is not doiche Shabbos. Wow. Oh. So now, says the Gemara, if this is taka the truth, Rabbi Eliezer is the one that taught Rabbi Akiva that hazah. Now, we have to understand why. Don't forget that Rabbi Eliezer holds machshirei Pesach is doiche Shabbos. But Rabbi Eliezer taught that hazah is not. So taka mai tama hadarbe. Why did he retract? Because Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah seems to be retracting. The Gemara is going to say we did not understand the Mishnah properly. So Amar Ulam, here's a chayin. Let me tell you what happened. Rabbi Eliezer ki agmerei. When Rabbi Eliezer taught Rabbi Akiva that what? That hazah is not allowed to be done on Shabbos, even though it's only a shvus. It was only regarding hazah the truma agmerei. So if there is a yid that wants to eat truma, and for that he has to have the mechata sprinkled on him, Rabbi Eliezer told his student, Rabbi Akiva, no, hazah to permit the consumption of truma is asur. And why is that? Because even the separation of truma is asur. The truma gufei lo yidachia Shabbos. Oh, now Rabbi Akiva nami, but now we have to get something clear. Rabbi Akiva knew that. Rabbi Akiva was a good Talmud. He was taught that you can't do hazah on a person in order to permit him to eat truma, even though he would not be allowed to eat truma right away, but you can't do hazah on Shabbos for truma. So why did Rabbi Akiva Bachal speak about hazah? Rabbi Akiva was never speaking about hazah of the seventh day, B'negiyat Pesach. Rabbi Akiva nami ki oisvei, when he challenged Rabbi Eliezer, it was hazah the truma oisvei. Don't forget the back and forth of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Yeshua, don't bring me shchitas Pesach because it's reshus. So now comes the Rabbi Akiva and he says, here's the chayin, hazah to eat truma. Eating truma is a mitzvah. Eating truma is a mitzvah. She mitzvah. It's not according to you l'shitascha that Shabbos, that Yom Tiv can be kuloi lashem and you don't need to eat. No, eating truma is a mitzvah, and the hazah is only problematic because of a shvus, and yet you don't allow it to be done. All Rabbi Akiva meant was to tell him that even when there is a mitzvah involved, doesn't mean that a shvus can be broken. Problem was that Rabbi Eliezer misunderstood Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer thought hazah the Pesach komoisiv lei, which is why Rabbi Eliezer tells him, no, I never hazah of Pesach, according to the way we're learning right now, according to the Gemara right now, hazah on the seventh day, when that is on the 14th, taka should be done. And Rabbi Akiva knew that. Rabbi Akiva's response to Rabbi Eliezer to back up Rabbi Yeshua was taka from hazah of truma. Says the Gemara Masiv Rabbo on this entire approach. Let's read a Bryce. The Bryce adds more detail. That Heishiv Rabbi Akiva v'Amar hazah as t'mei meis toichiach. No, it was speaking about hazah as t'mei meis. Shachal shvi shaloi liyas b'Shabbos and ube'erev Pesach shehi mitzvah. Because if you were to spring the ashes of the red heifer on this yid, he will be allowed to partake in the Korban Pesach at night. He can't eat it that day. No one can eat it that day. Nevertheless, the prohibition of making azah is only a rabbinic. We'll see soon again what's the problem. Yet, so clearly we see from this brayso that Rabbi Akiva's a challenge to Rabbi Eliezer was not from azah truma. Elo vadai hazah the Pesach agmani. Let's go back. No, they're speaking about hazah the Pesach. Rabbi Eliezer himself taught Rabbi Akiva that hazah may not be done. Again, we'll have to see why. So here, write it. If Rabbi Akiva learned it from Rabbi Eliezer, why did Rabbi Eliezer change his position? That's why Rabbi Akiva got frustrated. He told him, don't deny the fact that I learned it from you. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer Gemare is Akerle. Rabbi Eliezer forgot. And the also Rabbi Akiva la'ad Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer was trying to remind, Rabbi Akiva is trying to remind his teacher Rabbi Eliezer what he taught him. When Rabbi Eliezer responded, no, that hazah could be done. No, Rabbi Akiva, really, if he would not have been respectful, he would have told him, no, you told me otherwise. The name of Behedya, why didn't he tell him explicitly? So the Gemara explains, because it's not nice, you're speaking to your Rebbe. So how did he try to remind him? He tried to remind him by saying something shocking. So he tells him, whoa. Not only is hazah not allowed, kal v'chomer, even shechita should not be allowed. Now Rabbi Akiva got very upset at that. I'm sorry, Rabbi Eliezer cursed him, as we just learned above. But now you appreciate the back and forth. Rabbi Akiva was not making chayzik. He was not mocking him. Rabbi Akiva was just trying to say something shocking as an indirect way of reminding Rabbi Eliezer that which Rabbi Eliezer taught. So now we understand the back and forth. And this is very important because we are coming and we're saying right now that even though when we learned the Mishnah, it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer holds that hazah could be done. Actually, Rabbi Eliezer taught Rabbi Akiva that hazah may not be done, and we'll have to understand why. Rabbi Eliezer allows machshirei mitzvah, machshirei Pesach, to override Shabbos. Hazah will be different. But before we get to that, B'chlal, what's the problem with hazah? Hazah my tamal lidach is Shabbos. Take the Gemara, michti, behold, tiltule be'almahu. Tiltule be'alma does not mean muktzah. This is not the only time. There are two types of rabbinic laws. There are certain rabbinic laws is that if you'll do this, you might break a doiraisa. That's considered a more serious rabbinic law. Then you have other rabbinic laws that you may not do certain things, not because if you'll do A, you might end up breaking a Torah. Don't do it. L'choira hazah, if hazah would be only because the way we learned in the Mishnah, because it's you're being mesaken gavra. That was Rashi and Daf Samachem at base. The last Rashi in the Amid, the last line in the Amid. That hazah, Rashi writes that mischaze ki mesaken gavra. It looks like you're rectifying a person. It's not discernible. It's ruchniistic. So it's a derabanan. That's a very weak derabanan, and therefore, if it would only be for that. Now that we established not only Rabbi Akiva, but really Rabbi Eliezer, who forgot, but the emes is Rabbi Eliezer also holds that hazah is not doicha. Why would it not be doicha? Titche Shabbos Mishum Pesach. If it's only because mechse kimesakin gavram. So here says the Gemara, Amar Rabba, no, this is a stronger rabbinic. It's a rabbinic because you might end up violating a doiraisa. That's something. That is a strong Isur D'Rabbanan, and Bein l'Rabbi Akiva, Bein l'Rabbi Eliezer, it may not be done. However, okay, now that we said that really Rabbi Eliezer agrees with it, but Rabbi Eliezer is lenient. Rabbi Eliezer na'avrei, you should be allowed to spritz water because the Ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer machshirei mitzvah doichenas haShabbos. Answers the Gemara, listen to this logic. Amri, they explain the following. Hanamili, heicha de gavra gufei chazi. If the person is fit to do the mitzvah, I'm tahor. I just don't have a lamb. My lamb is outside the tchum. Now, if I'm chazi, so the rami chiyuvi alei, says Rabbi Eliezer, machshirei mitzvah doiche. Avol, however, if the yid is tamei, without doing the hazah, he's not Chazay, right? He's not fit, and therefore, since he's not fit, so there's no obligation. If there's no obligation on him, how can you override the prohibition if he's not even obligated? Gewaldig. Now, of course, the ideal would be become pure, become obligated, and do the mitzvah. But in order to become pure, I have to violate the Rabbanan. And like we said, it's not a lesser D'Rabbanan like Tiltul Ba'alma. It's a Gzeira Shamay Avirena, Zoisloi. Well, says Rabba on this logic, the Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, would we say that only cotton body, when you have a minor and bris chavres doicha Shabbos, if the baby is born naturally, in the times of Chazal, what was essential before the bris was to bathe the baby in hot water. Obviously, it's better to warm up the water from before Shabbos, but part of what we learned in the beginning of Rabbi Eliezer Demil on Shabbos Kuflamid is what happens if someone forgot to do so, machshirei mitzvah. That was not done, that could have been done. Are you allowed to warm up the water? And Rabbi Eliezer says yes. Like over here, machshirei mitzvah is doicha Shabbos. Will we say only if the child is healthy, then mechamin, loy chamin, lahavrois and Shabbos? Why? Because he's healthy. The hachazili. But according to your logic, would it be true to say that cotton choila, that if to begin with he's ill, ein mechamin loy chamin lahavrois and then even Rabbi Eliezer will admit, like here, you're telling me hazah may not be done because the holy chazile. Would this be true? Amar Rava, says Rava to his teacher, to Rabba, who asked the question. 1 second. The body who, if he's healthy, why are you warming up the water? And like we mentioned, Elo Amar Rava, hakoil choilun eitzel milah. Bris milah is different. Even a healthy baby, then in the times of Chazal, if you would not bathe the baby in warm water before the bris, it would put the bris would become something very dangerous. So therefore, echad cotton body, the echad cotton chayla, based on what we just said, that even Rabbi Eliezer that is matir, machshirei mitzvah, but that's only if there's a chiyuv. Ein mechamen lechamen lavroisei v'lo b'Shabbos. Dolei chazi. So the Mishnah and Shabbos was about if they didn't sharpen the knife, if they didn't carry the knife, fine. But Taka, don't apply Shitas Rabbi Eliezer to a heter to warm up the water. Now that we differentiated between Haza'ah and the other Machshirei Mitzvah, yes, apply the same logic, and no water may ever be warmed up for a baby. It has to be pre-warmed, and if not, even Rabbi Eliezer will hold that the milah will not be done on Shabbos. Gevaldik. Okay, so the bottom line is that when you learn the Mishnah, we learned the Mishnah correctly. From what's written in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that Hazah is allowed to be done on Shabbos. What came out from this sugya? Rabbi Eliezer, during this conversation, forgot his learning, forgot this detail. He forgot this din of Hazah. But the emes, Rabbi Eliezer agrees to Rabbi Akiva that Hazah may not be done on the Yid, and therefore this Jew will not be able to bring the Korban Pesach. So Eitzvei Abaye, how can you say that? It says in a Braisa, Orel Shaloimal, if a non-circumcised person, this is Bechlal, did not circumcise himself on the 14th in order for him to be allowed to bring the Korban Pesach, Anush Kares. He's going to be punished with Kares. Why? Look inside the first Rashi under the Gemara. Bishvil Shahoyu Roi L'Sakin, because when the 6th hour entered, which is in the afternoon, when the obligation of Pesach came, he could have rectified, and he didn't. Hold on, an Adol has no obligation to bring the Pesach. An Adol may not bring the Korban Pesach. So how are you punishing him when you're giving me this logic that when a person is loy chazi, there's no chiyuv on him? Gevaldik. Did Rabbi Eliezer? So Abaye verbalizes the question, because he's still an Adol. Yet the Mishnah says he's punished with kares. Is araya alma that Rami chiyuv alei? We don't say since right now he's an Adol. No. He's not chazi, he's not fit, but he's obligated. So I'm back to the kasha. So even though this yid is tamei, he's obligated. And if he's obligated, then why wouldn't Rabbi Eliezer allow haza'ah? In the Mishnah, he says he does, but we just discovered that really Rabbi Eliezer taught Rabbi Akiva that haza'ah is not doichem. Last line in the Amid. So Amar Rabba. Wow, Chevra Halkop over here. Kosova Rabbi Eliezer ain't sheichten the zorkin al tamei sheret. Stop before you turn the Amid. Wait. This is a machlokes on Daf Tzadik. Tamei sheretz, and this Jew is the same. We're speaking about a person who's tamei now. Tamei sheretz is only tamei for 1 day. He doesn't even need hazah, but he has to go to the mikvah, and at night he's going to be allowed to eat kachim. if you have such a Tamei Sheretz, do you shech the Pesach for him, or do you defer him to Pesach Sheni? Same thing will be when you have a Jew. Forget about the issue of breaking Shabbos Midrabanan and Shvus. During the week, today is Erev Pesach. The Jew, today is the 7th day of Tamei Meis. What has to happen is he has to have Hazah, he has to go to the mikvah, and at night he'll become completely pure. He'll be able even to eat kachim. Does he bring the Korban Pesach today, or do you defer him to Pesach Sheni? Don't forget that right now the Jew is tamei. More nuance of this argument, we're going to learn a little bit on Samachtes, and then we'll learn it later. So Rabba says that it must be that Rabbi Eliezer sides with the Shita that you don't shecht for a Tamei Sheretz, which means that they're deferred to Pesach Sheni. So let's come back. What was the kasha? And Otto, what were we asking? Why doesn't Otto get Kaddish? Obviously, because he's obligated to mal himself. Well, why don't we tell the Jew you're obligated to get Hazah? And then the kasha would come back. So why would Hazah not be Doicha Shabbos? So there he makes a building with 3 floors, 3 steps. Step number 1 says Rabbi Eliezer subscribes to the Shita that if a person is tamei now, even though he's able to become tahar for tonight, you're tamei now, you defer to Pesach Sheni. Tamei Sheretz, same 7th day of Tamei Meis, Daf Samachtes. Step number 2, very important. V'chol she'ilui b'yachid nitcha. Whenever there's a scenario where if there is a yachid, like in our case, Tamei Sheretz that we mentioned. I know that, guys, we learned a few days ago, Zov is not nitche, the Pesach Sheni. Fine. We're speaking about Tamei Meis or a Tamei Sheretz. Anytime that a individual, because of his status of Tuma, is going to be deferred to Pesach Sheni, the klal is B'tzibur Avdi B'Tuma. That's step number 2. And by the way, we never learned Tamei Sheretz. We learned Zov is not deferred to Pesach Sheni. We learned Tamei Meis, Derech Rechoika, that's explicit, is deferred to Pesach Sheni. Now we're learning another din that also includes a Tamei Sheretz, which means that if the roiv of the tzibur are Tameim B'Tuma Sheretz, they bring Pesach Rishon and they're not obligated to go to the mikveh. That's the chiddush here. You would say, go to the mikveh. No, why should they go to the mikveh? Since a yachid is deferred to Pesach Sheni, if you subscribe to step number 1, that ein sheich to mizarchal Tamei Sheretz, so the tzibur doesn't even have the obligation of doing tara. They can bring it b'tuma. And now step number 3 is second line. V'chol milsa de isya b'tzibur isya b'yachid. When God obligated the Pesach, how do you view the obligation of Pesach? The obligation of Pesach, yes, it's for me, but it was given to everyone. Whenever there's a chiyuv on the tzibur, then it trickles down to you, the yachid. Very importantly, not only are we speaking about the general primary obligation of shechting the Pesach, we are also speaking about all of the derivatives that comes from it, which would be that if a person has to purify himself in order to bring it, then the obligation would also include that. But whenever there is an obligation on the tzibur, not only to bring the Pesach itself, but to do all the other secondary steps, or what happens, guys, if the tzibur is arelim, then the tzibur is obligated to have bris milas, and that goes down to every yachid, isya b'yachid. However, v'chol misa de leisa b'tzibur, leisa b'yachid. If you don't have an obligation on a tzibur, then there's nothing to trickle down on the yachid. And again, not only the general obligation or the primary obligation of Pesach, but all of the other secondary steps that are needed. If the tzibur doesn't have to do it, then the yachid doesn't have to do it. This is amazing. So you have these 3 steps. It's going to hop like this. Areilois, the I kul tzibur areilim, ninu, amrina lohu kumu mahalu nafshaych v'avida pischa. If everyone is an adult, they're not exempt. And God forbid they don't bring it be'arelos. No, there's an obligation on the tzibur that you have to circumcise yourselves. So that's the 3rd rule. Kol milsa de isa b'tzibur isa b'yachid. And therefore, that explains the brais on the end of Amud Aleph. Yachid nami yomeninanlei kum mahul va'avid pischa. Even though right now he's not fit, So what? There's a chiyuv on him. Go get a bris milah. And if he ilay mal va'avid, says Rabbi Eliezer, yes, onush kares. So what was your kasha? Your kasha is, why isn't Rabbi Eliezer permitting hazah on Shabbos, even though, guys, hazah is a shvus, and it's in order not to carry, it's a real rabbinic, but still machshirei mitzvah. Why would we not obligate him? So now he explains, since tuma de'i kula tzibura tameim ninu, loy madinan alayu, that was the whole point of step number 2, based on step number 1. Everything is based on step number 1. In other words, if the roiv of the tzibur is tamei sheretz, all they need to do is go to the mikvah. We don't obligate him to go to the mikvah. Amazing. Why don't we obligate him to go to the mitzvah? The top line in the Amid. Because if you follow the shita of ein shoichatem v'zorken al tamei sheretz, you don't say go to the mikvah. You defer him to Pesach Sheni. So the rule is, the top line in the Amid, that whenever the Yachid is deferred to Pesach Sheni, the way he is, the tzibur, the way they are, bring the Pesach Rishon. So since the tzibur is not obligated to go to the mikvah, the tzibur is obligated to bring the korban Pesach, but they're not obligated to go to the mikvah. You can never obligate the Yachid to do these secondary steps of becoming tahor. Whether it is going to the mikvah if you're Tamei Sheretz, whether it is hazah and mikvah if you're in the 7th day of Tamei Meis. Tuma de'i kula tzibura tameim ninu loy madinan alayu. We don't spritz, we don't sprinkle the waters. Elo vart numbers then of the betuma. So Yachid Nami Pater. Wow, that was Rabbah, and that was all based. That only worked because Rabbah is connecting Rabbi Eliezer to the last line in the Amud Samach Tes Amud Aleph, that ain't Sheikhtim V'Zorkin al Tamei Sheretz. Hold on, we're not done. So Amalei Rafunu B'nei Rabbi Yishua LeRava. I have a kasha on this rule. What are you telling me that anything that's on the tzibur goes on the yachid? Now everyone agrees to the general, but we're speaking about that anything that is on the tzibur, meaning not only the primary, the shchitas, Pesach, but also with any other step that's needed to do a bris milah, to go to the mikvah, to do hazah. Hold on, the whole thing is not true. Pesach Sheni, there is never a tzibur bringing a Pesach Sheni. You have yechidim that bring it. You have yechidim that bring it, but there's the leisa betzibur, the isya biyachid. So the Gemara gives a gavaldik answer. The Gemara says, you don't understand. The whole Pesach Sheni is a continuation of Pesach Rishon. Punkt fakert. Pesach Rishon is on the tzibur, which is why the yachid brings the Pesach Sheni. Amalei shani hasim the ha'avid leit tzibura b'rishon. And I'll tell you more. It's very important. But he's really saying, let's go this in the opposite direction. What happens if the entire tzibur was unable to bring the Pesach Rishon? I'll give you an example. Roiv were Zavim. Zavim may not bring it. We learned that a few daf ago. But when we learned a few daf ago, we said, yeah, but they can come and bring in Pesach Sheni. Let me ask you something. If Roiv were Zavim, and the other minority, they were Tamei Meis. If it would have happened theoretically that not a single Jew brought Pesach Rishon, you know what? No one would bring Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni is the hemshech of Pesach Rishon. Mashiach has to come right now. But God forbid if Mashiach would have come, go backwards. If Mashiach would have come last year between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, what would happen? We would not bring a Pesach Sheni because we didn't bring a Pesach Rishon. Still, weiter. The Gemara is still going to challenge this concept. Meisvei says in a Braisa, Yachol lo yehei anush kares, ela shehoyu toir v'shaloi hoyu b'derech rechaika. You would think that who gets kares for not bringing the Pesach Rishon? Only someone that was pure, only someone that was near. What about an Adol who didn't bring the Pesach Rishon? What about a Tamei Sheretz that didn't bring the Pesach Rishon? Or any other person who's Tamei, who was able to purify himself. Minayin, says the Braisa, how do you know that this person also is going to get kares? Talmud Leimer, And we quote the pasuk from Parshas Baha'aloischa, Veha'ish. Now really the pasuk reads that Veha'ish asher hu toir, ubaderech lo yhaya, and v'chad alaso is ha-pesach. So the vav in Veha'ish is extra. Says Torah Shabal Peh, says the Braisa, that the vav is including the aro, the Tamei Sheretz. That will be the problem. That they will get kares for not bringing Pesach Rishon. Now, don't come and tell me, yeah, this Braisa, what's the sheet of this Braisa? Shoichtin v'zorken al Tamei Sheretz, or ein shoichtin v'zorken? So the Gemara says like this, that me, the kamahadir at Tamei Sheretz, the fact that we need to find the pasuk to include a Tamei Sheretz in karetz is a proof that this Braisa holds ein shoichatin v'zorken al Tamei Sheretz. If you would be obligated to do the shechita of a korban Pesach for someone who's a Tamei Sheretz, if that's the given, then you don't even need an extra vav. Then avada, they would be obligated to go to the mikveh. The Pesach is being brought for them. They have to eat it. They have to go to the mikveh to eat it at night. The fact that the Braisa needs to have a special vav to include the Tamei Sheretz, this Braisa holds the way you are saying, the way you, Rabbi, are saying that Rabbi Eliezer holds, ein shoichatin v'zorken. But if ein shoichatin v'zorken means that you defer them to the Pesach Sheni, the way we have been learning until now, how can you say they're chayiv kares? Defer them to Pesach Sheni. Oy gewalt. Is a raya that the meaning of ein shoichatin v'zorken al Tamei Sheretz means that if this person did not go to the mikveh, you can't shecht for him. But they have to go to the mikveh and bring Pesach Rishon. All of that is in the shita of ein shoichatin v'zorken. So this Braisa holds ein shoichatin v'zorken, and because the ish shoichatin v'zorken al Tamei Sheretz, why do you have to have an extra pasuk? That's a person who potentially is already taught. Alma, we see clearly that afagav doli chazem, nevertheless chiyuva alei. And here the main point will be that how can you give me the step number 3? That the chol nilsa de leisa b'tzibur leisa b'yachid. No, leisa b'tzibur. If roiv tzibur is Tamei Sheretz, they're not obligated to go to the mikveh, and a yachid is obligated to go to the mikveh. And if this yachid doesn't go to the mikveh, he's chayiv kares. So Ella Omar Rava, he disagrees with Rabba. Rabba says Rabbi Eliezer holds ein shoichatin v'zorken. Rava says Rabbi Eliezer holds shoichatin v'zorken al Tamei Sheretz. Hold on. You do it for him. So we're back to our question. All of this is because why will Rabbi Eliezer say that Hazah is not done? Why would you not do Hazah? What's the problem? Rabbi Eliezer holds Machshirei Mitzvah Ardoichen Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer in Masechta Shabbos says you can carry the knife itself, not Gezerah Shemi. You can be ma'ived the knife. Oh, the meaning of Shoichatin v'Zorken al Tamei Sheretz, and like we said, for who adin l'Tamei Meis b'Shvi Shaloi. The pshat is that you don't have to go to the mikveh. The shita that says ein shoichatin v'zorken al Tamei Sheretz means that if you did not go to the mikveh, you're chayiv kares for that. You're not allowed to shecht for the person. Shoichatin v'zorken means you don't have to go to the mikveh. You won't be allowed to eat. But even though you are not allowed to eat, you can shecht the Pesach for that person. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer says Hazah is not doicha because Hazah is not needed. The Pesach can happen anyways. Now, of course, the person would want to eat. Is eating the Pesach essential? So now we're going to introduce the shita that will say that no, eating the Pesach is not essential. It has to be done for people that are physically not old. It has to be done for people that are able to eat a kazayis. But if the person is able to eat a kazayis, but they halachically cannot do so, it's good nevertheless, according to Rabbi Eliezer. And that will be the reason why Rabbi Eliezer will hold that Hazah is not doichem. Oh, gavaldik. So why would you have to do Hazah? L'achila. Achilas psachim lo'ima akva. Even if you won't eat it, it's not going to mess up the carbon. So there's no need to do Hazah. And we learned that above. So answers the Gemara, Amalei shalei la'oichlav only means begashmias. The person is ill, the person is old. He's not fit. He Pashut cannot eat a kazayis. Aval Hai, the first white line, is Mechza Chaze. He's able, Elamai, halachically, he's Tamei. Takunehu delay metakin. And since Rabbi Eliezer holds that Achilas Psachim Laima Akva, so even the lenient Rabbi Eliezer will not allow to do Hazah. So what we end up here is with a machlekes between a teacher and a student, between Rabbi and Rava, whether Rabbi Eliezer holds Ein Shechet and Muzarkan al Tamei Sheretz, whether Rabbi Eliezer holds Shechet and Muzarkan al Tamei Sheretz, and a whole new understanding of these two shitas. And more of this, God willing, will be later on Daf Tzadik. Okay, Chavre, let's continue. The first white line, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva who sided with Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva that defended Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva that sadly, he was being respectful to Rabbi Eliezer, who was a sharp person. Rabbi Eliezer took an insult and he told him sharp words. Rabbi Akiva concluded the Mishnah by saying that anything that could have been done before, by those were the words, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, Kol Malacha she'efshel asoisim erev Shabbos eino doichas haShabbos. Shchita could not have been done before Shabbos. Shchita is doichas Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Halacha ki Rabbi Akiva. Sometimes we have, like inside the Tosfos, Hilchas El Mashicha. Here and here, not everyone asks that question. There are times that the Gemara, in other words, machlokes about the Beis Hamikdash is common. But the question is, should the Gemara paskin something when Mashiach is not here yet? So sometimes the Gemara asks, Hilchas El Mashiach, and Tosfos says, the Gemara doesn't always have to ask that question. Not everyone has a problem with that. Indeed, we are paskening like Rabbi Akiva. And not only do we pasken here by Pesachim, but the Tanach Nami Gabe Mila Ki Agavno, that when we learned to Rabbi Eliezer the Mila, like we cut on quoting, not about preparing the hot water. Let's go, we learned to Amud Aleph that hot water you may never prepare on Shabbos, but all the other Machshirim Mila, the Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, he's not lenient like Rabbi Eliezer. He says, Kol Malacha she'efshel asoisim erev Shabbos eino doichas haShabbos. You're not going to do Mila Bashmini. You should have brought the knife before. Only Mila she'i efshel asoisim erev Shabbos is doichas Shabbos. And there also the Amar Rav Yehuda Marav that halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. The question is, why did he have to state it twice? Vitzricha, because the Ashmin and Gabi Pesach Hasam who de machshirei mitzvah loy doichu Shabbos. Why? Because maybe it's not as important as by Pesach. Mila is more important. The mishum delay nichrasu allow shloish esek berisois. But when it comes to a bris milah, since the nichrasu allow shloish esek berisois, we might think ema that lidachi. And on the other hand, v'i ashmin and hadrav only paskin dear by milah hasam hu de machshirei mitzvah loy doichu Shabbos because the leka kares. Oh, 1 second. Bris Milah and Pesach are actually the two mitzvahs asay for which there is a chi of kares. But like Rashi writes over here, right before the Mishnah, that if a Bris Milah is not done today, you're not going to get kares today. Do the bris tomorrow. If the Pesach that could have been brought was not brought today, then you get kares. Avo Pesach they got kares. Ema litchu. That's why he needed to paskin in both cases kishitas Rabbi Akiva and not like Rabbi Eliezer. We have time, and let's speak out the Mishnah. We spoke out the Mishnah in the intro. The Gemara is going to explain the continuation of the first Mishnah in the Perek that we just unpackaged, and the new Mishnah. We are speaking about Chagigas Arba'a Asar, not the Chagiga of the first day, but the Chagiga that was only brought when we would not have enough meat from the Korban Pesach to have everyone feel satisfied. So that Chagigas Yudalid is not always brought. Korban Pesach is always brought, even on Shabbos. Shchitas doichas Shabbos, Zrikas doichas Shabbos, right? Hekter Chalav doichas Shabbos, Michri Keravav is doichas Shabbos. However, Amosai, maybe Chagiga Imai on the 14th, three conditions. Bisman Shehu, when the Pesach itself comes in a weekday, on a weekday you shechlet. If the people are betahara, then you bring the Chagiga. Pesach doesn't have to be brought on a weekday. Pesach, we learned in the first Mishnah, is brought on Shabbos. If Roiv Tzibur is to Meis, now we learned another detail. If Roiv Tzibur is to Sheretz, they don't even go to the mikvah. They bring it betuma, not the Chagiga. And number 3, Ubemuat, like Rashi writes 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that if you don't have enough meat from the Pesach to have every pre-registered Yid near satisfaction for the Pesach to come al hasoiva, that is when you bring the Chagiga. Contrasting, however, the Mishnah speaks out the other three sides, shaloik ha'aseder, which has to be explained. But ubisman shehu ba b'Shabbos, but if the Pesach is brought on Shabbos, you daled is on Erev Shabbos, or b'meruba, there's so much meat of the Pesach that even if you don't have a Chagigas Arba Asr, everyone is going to have enough meat from the Pesach to feel satisfied. Or if there is Tumah, no problem, Pesach overrides Tumah, but not the Chagiga. Ein Mavin Imay Chagiga. Another difference between the Chagiga and the Pesach. Chagiga Haisaba'am Minatzoin. It comes from the flock. Tzoin means lambs and goats. And Min Habakar, also from cattle. In other words, now the question is why the Mishnah repeats it. That's another question. Min HaKavasim umin ha'izim, right? And min ha'zacharim umin ha'nekevos. The gender of the animal for the Chagiga is not relevant. Look inside Rashi, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Masha enken bePesach. Pesach does not come from cattle. I know a Pesach can be lambs or goats, but it can be from cattle. Number 2, the Pesach has to be a male animal, cannot be a female animal. And back in the Mishnah, and the other difference is that the Chagiga can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. The Korban Pesach, as we'll learn more details, is only eaten not even a day. You may not eat it a day. The Korban Pesach is only eaten at night. Let's just have the first 2 lines in the Gemara. The Gemara asks, Man Tana, the Ktani Chagiga. How did Chagiga fall in over here? What's the Hemshech? So answers the Gemara Tana, we learned in the previous Mishnah, actions that you could do, that you can do, right? We're going like with Rabbi Akiva. We're going with Rabbi Yeshua. Shchita yeh, harkavasoi, havasoi, deloy dachi Shabbos. So the Mishnah continues, other things that are not dachi Shabbos. The Ktani nami chagiga deloy dachi Shabbos, and v'hachi ka'amar eimosai, mevi'en imay chagiga, bizman shehu b'bachoil, u'betara, u'bemuat. In other words, not like the pay. Number 1, b'chlal to begin with, chagiga is not dachi Shabbos. And on top of that, right, other details that it's not doiche tumah, and if it's not needed because people will be satisfied without that carbon, then it need not be brought, God willing, to be continued. That was a hard daf, at least late at night, but good. All right, Chevra, so tomorrow morning, we're not going to learn. Monday morning at 6 a.m. Mirz Hashem.
Rabbi.
Thank you.